My name is Hazel Norwood, and I am 31 years old. I had spent 4 years building something that was finally genuinely mine. A small event planning business I had started out of my apartment after my divorce, running it on secondhand folding tables and sheer stubbornness until it actually worked. I had a client list. I had a reputation. I had a business savings account with enough in it to cover the deposit on a proper commercial space downtown. The lease already signed, the keys sitting in a white envelope on my kitchen counter. And then my mother called a family meeting. She called it on a Thursday evening in October, which should have been my first warning. My mother does not call family meetings for good news. She calls them the way a general calls a briefing before an offensive, with the outcome already decided and the agenda already written, and your job is simply to show up and receive your assignment. I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house in Glendale with the windows down, telling myself it was probably nothing, probably some holiday scheduling conflict. Probably my younger sister Amber needed help moving again, which would be the third time in 2 years, and which I had helped with both previous times without complaint. I had gotten very good at helping without complaint. I had been practicing that particular skill my entire life. The kitchen smelled like the pot roast my mother always made when she wanted the room to feel warm and soft and off guard. My father was at the counter with a glass of iced tea, not quite looking at me when I walked in. Amber was already seated at the table with her husband Drew, and they were both very still in the way that people are still, when they have already been told the plan and are waiting for it to be announced to someone else. I pulled out a chair across from them and sat down, and my mother set a plate of bread in the center of the table and then folded her hands and said she had something she needed to talk to us about. What she said, in the careful, padded language she always used when she was doing something she knew was wrong, was this. Drew had been laid off 3 months ago. The severance had run out. They were behind on the mortgage, behind on 2 car payments, and Amber's credit cards were maxed because they had been living on them since August. They were, as my mother put it, in a genuinely precarious situation. And then she turned to me and said that she and my father had talked it over, and they believed the right thing, the family thing, was for me to lend them the money I had set aside for my business lease. Not a loan with a contract, not a plan for repayment with a timeline, just the money, handed over, because Amber needed it and I had it, and that was how family worked, and surely I understood. I sat with that for a moment. The deposit on my commercial space was $18,000. The lease started in 6 weeks. I had spent 4 years building toward that specific number and that specific date, had turned down a standing offer to go back to corporate HR work 3 separate times because I believed in what I was building, had eaten a lot of plain pasta dinners and skipped a lot of things I wanted because that $18,000 was going to change what my business could be. And my mother was sitting across from me with her hands folded and her voice warm and explaining that Amber needed it more. I looked at Drew. He was studying the bread plate. He had the look of a man who had agreed to let his mother-in-law fight this battle for him. I looked at Amber, who met my eyes for exactly 2 seconds before looking away, which told me everything about how long she had known this was coming, and how long she had chosen not to warn me. I said, "Let me think about it." My mother's expression shifted just slightly, not into surprise, more into the look she got when someone had given a wrong answer on a test she had written. She said she hoped I understood the urgency, that they were already looking at a potential foreclosure timeline if things didn't stabilize, and that she and my father knew it wasn't a small ask, but they also knew I was in a position to help. She said the word family twice more before the conversation ended. I drove home with the windows up this time. What I did not say at that table, and what I had not said in the 48 hours that followed when my mother called twice, and my father sent one very short text that just said, "We're counting on you," was that I had already made my decision before I walked out of that kitchen. Not the decision they were waiting for, the other one. I had been the family's soft landing for a long time. When Amber's first apartment fell through at 22, because she had missed the application deadline, I had let her stay in my 1-bedroom for 3 months. When she needed a co-signer for the car she bought at 25, I had signed. When the marriage hit a rough patch 2 years in, and she needed to fly to our aunt's place in Phoenix to clear her head, I had covered the flight because she'd said she was broke. I had done all of those things because I loved my sister, and because my parents had raised me to understand, implicitly and explicitly, that being the older one meant being the stable one, and being the stable one meant being available, and being available meant that whatever you were building could wait. I had waited a lot of years. I was done waiting. On Saturday morning, I called my bank and confirmed the lease payment was still scheduled to process in 2 weeks. It was. I said thank you and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold and I typed out a text to my mother that said, I've thought about it, and I can't give them the money. The lease is signed and the payment is locked in. I'm sorry. I put the phone face down on the table. And I sat there in the quiet of my apartment and felt something in my chest that I couldn't quite name. Not guilt, exactly, and not relief exactly, but something that lived in the space between them. Something that felt like finally being honest about what I could and couldn't carry. My mother did not text back. She called. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again and I let that go too. The third call I picked up because I knew from a lifetime of experience that not picking up the third call only made the fourth call worse. She did not open with hello. She said she was very disappointed. She said she had expected more from me. She said that what I was doing, choosing a business lease over my own sister's home, was something she was going to have to sit with for a long time. She said Drew was working very hard to find something new, and it wasn't his fault the company had downsized. And she hoped I could find some compassion for that because he was family now, and family meant something. I let her talk. I had learned a long time ago not to argue in the middle of one of my mother's disappointment speeches, because they were designed to be experienced, not interrupted. You were supposed to sit inside the weight of them until you agreed, and then the warmth came back and everyone moved on. I had agreed my way through a lot of those speeches. I did not agree this time. When she finished, I said, I hear you, and I love you. And I'm not able to do this. She hung up. What followed was 11 days of quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the pressurized kind, where my phone wasn't ringing and I knew it wasn't ringing because people were deciding what to do with me. My father didn't call. Amber didn't call. I went to a client meeting on Tuesday and spent 2 hours discussing centerpiece arrangements for a retirement party and thought about how strange it was to be completely functional in my professional life, while my family reorganized itself around my refusal. I bought groceries. I walked my neighbor's dog. I kept showing up to my own life. On the 9th day, Amber texted me. She didn't text anything about the money. She texted a photo, a screenshot of a listing for a rental property in Pasadena, a 2-bedroom with a small yard, and a price that was genuinely manageable. She said, we found something. Just wanted you to know. I stared at that text for a long time. There was no thank you and no apology, but there was also no ask, and coming from Amber in that moment, the absence of an ask felt like something. I said, that's good, I'm glad. She sent back a thumbs up. That was the entire conversation. But something about that text nagged at me in a way I couldn't fully settle. The speed of it. 9 days from we might lose the house to we found a rental with a manageable price. Drew had been unemployed for 3 months. The savings were gone. The credit cards were maxed. How exactly had they managed to come up with a deposit on a rental in Pasadena in 9 days? I told myself it wasn't my business. I had made my decision and it had not involved their money, and it was not my place to audit how they had sorted themselves out. I went back to my work. I confirmed the delivery timeline with my florist. I drafted 2 new client proposals. And then, on the 11th day, my phone rang at 8:52 in the morning and it was my aunt, my mother's older sister, who lived in Phoenix and who I had always been close to. And she said, before I could even finish saying hello, that she needed to ask me something directly. She said, did you know they asked me to? I didn't say anything for a moment. She said that Amber and Drew had called her 2 weeks before the family meeting. They had told her the same situation. The layoff, the mortgage, the credit cards, and asked if she could loan them $20,000. She had said no, because she didn't have $20,000 liquid, and she had suggested they reach out to the rest of the family. And then a week later, my mother had called her to loop her in on the plan to ask me. I sat with that. They had been working a circuit. My aunt first, then me. My mother as the coordinator. And at no point in the Thursday evening family meeting, at no point in my mother's disappointment speech, at no point in the 11 days of silence that followed, had anyone mentioned that I was not the first person who had been asked and had said no. I told my aunt I hadn't known. She said she figured as much, and that she wanted me to know because she thought I deserved to make my decision with the full picture. She said she hoped things didn't stay hard between me and my mother for too long, and then she said, and I am quoting her exactly here because I have thought about this sentence many times since. You've always been the one they go to because you've always said yes, and you only said no once. So they don't have a category for it yet. I thanked her. I held the phone for a while after the call ended. I thought about what my aunt had said. You've always been the one they go to because you've always said yes. I had been saying yes since I was 22 years old. Yes to the 3 months on my couch. Yes to the cosign. Yes to the flight to Phoenix. Yes, 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 accommodation after accommodation, because that was what you did. Because I loved them. Because I genuinely wanted things to go well for the people I loved. But also, and this was the part I had been looking at sideways for years, and now needed to look at directly, because I had been trained since childhood to understand that my stability was a resource, not a circumstance, and that resources were for sharing when someone more in need came along. The unspoken math of my family was that Amber's needs were needs, and mine were preferences, and preferences yielded. I had yielded for 9 years. I was 31 years old. I had built a business in 2 rooms of an apartment after a divorce that had cost me nearly everything, and I had rebuilt it slowly and carefully with no help from anyone. And the lease on that downtown space was 6 days away from processing, and the keys were still sitting in that white envelope on my kitchen counter, and I was not yielding. My mother called on day 14. I picked up. Her voice was different from the disappointment speech. Quieter, less rehearsed, the kind of voice that comes out when something has been sitting too long and is starting to press, she said. She had talked to my aunt. She said she wasn't calling to rehash the decision about the money. She said she wanted to say that she was sorry for the way she had handled the meeting. That she should have told me about the conversation with my aunt. That it wasn't fair to present the situation as if I was the only option when I wasn't the first option either. It was the closest thing to a real apology my mother had ever given me. I didn't say I forgive you, because I wasn't sure yet what forgiveness looked like in the geography of this particular thing. What I said was, I appreciate that, and I meant it. She asked if we could have dinner soon. I said yes. We picked a Sunday 2 weeks out, which felt like the right amount of distance. Close enough that it meant something. Far enough that it wouldn't be forced. I didn't ask about Amber and Drew. My mother didn't bring them up. That conversation, whatever it would eventually look like, was for another time. The lease payment processed 4 days later. I got an email confirmation and then a call from the property manager saying the space was officially mine as of December 1st, and did I need the building code for the back entrance. I wrote it down on a sticky note and put it on the refrigerator next to a photo of the space I had taken the day I signed, all empty walls and afternoon light, and the particular silence of a place that didn't belong to anyone yet. I cried a little, which surprised me. Not sad crying, the other kind. My friend Lena, who had been through 2 relocations and a bankruptcy and still managed to send me a care package of coffee and good candles when I told her what had happened with my family, had said something to me during that week of silence that I kept coming back to. She had said, the people who make you feel guilty for protecting yourself are usually the people who benefited most from you not doing it. I thought about that a lot. I still think about it. Amber and I have spoken twice since then. The first time was a phone call about our grandmother's birthday, logistics only, but we stayed on for an extra 10 minutes talking about something she'd seen on TV, and it felt almost normal. The second time she showed up at my parents' house the same Sunday I came for dinner, and we sat across the table from each other, and I thought about that Thursday meeting in October and how different the room felt now. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. But she asked me something about my business, a real question, curious, not performative. And I answered it, and she listened, and that was something. Drew got a job in early January, mid-level operations at a logistics company in Burbank, decent salary, benefits. I found out through my mother, not through Amber, which told me something about where we still were. But they found their footing. They moved into that Pasadena rental. Things stabilized, the way things tend to when they have no other choice. I don't know yet what I want my relationship with Amber to look like going forward. I've stopped trying to decide in advance. What I know is that I am not going backward to the version of me who said yes, because it was easier than the conversation that came with no. I spent too long in that version. The discomfort of leaving it has turned out to be a lot more manageable than I expected. The guilt still comes sometimes, usually late at night when I'm tired and my defenses are down. But it comes softer now, and it passes faster, and underneath it, when I get quiet enough, what I find is something that doesn't feel like guilt at all. It feels like the first full breath I've taken in years. The commercial space on Garfield Avenue opened in December. I painted one wall a deep warm green because I had always wanted to, and no one could tell me not to. I bought a real desk and a proper printer and 2 armchairs for the client consultation corner, the kind with wide cushions and low arms that make people feel like sitting down and talking for longer than they planned. I put a print on the wall near the window. Just a simple one, black text on cream paper, that says, "You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm." My aunt flew out for the opening. She stood in the middle of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, and looked around at all of it, the desk and the armchairs and the green wall, and the late afternoon light coming in through the front windows. And she said it looked exactly like me. That's the truest compliment I've ever been paid. If any part of this landed with you, if you've ever been the one the family calls first, the one they expect to say yes, the one whose plans are always just slightly more negotiable than everyone else's, then I think you already know why this story is worth telling. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you're here for the next one.